The Entrepreneur's Library, episode 212.
Welcome to the Entrepreneur's Library, the only book-centric podcast that reviews all the top-selling business books and shares authors' perspective firsthand. This is your resource to finding the next great book that will enable you to grow personally and professionally. Welcome your host, Wade Danielson.
Welcome back to the EL. Today we have Matt Britton, author of YouthNation, Building Remarkable Brands in a Youth-Driven Culture. This was a really fascinating episode because he talks about those millennials, and I happen to be on kind of the old man in that millennial group because he talked about it kind of tops out at 34. And I just turned 31, but what he talks about is so fascinating. And some of the things he shares in his favorite quote is so relevant. So those of you that follow me on Twitter, I guess you probably saw this a couple of weeks ago because I love to live tweet during the actual interviews. And again, that brings me to the point. If you guys want to hear from some authors, I would love to hear from you. So hit me up at Wade D. Danielson on Twitter. So without further ado, let's bring on Matt. Welcome, Matt, and thank you for joining us on the Entrepreneur's Library.
Great to be here.
Before we take a deep dive into your book, which is about to be released, YouthNation, will you take just a moment to introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about you personally.
Sure. I'm Matt Britton. My career is I'm founder and CEO of MRY, which is an advertising agency focusing on digital and social technology to really help brands break through and be remarkable with their consumer.
Excellent. Well, very good. Well, let's do just that now. Let's dive into the book itself. So, one, thank you for sharing that. Let's jump into YouthNation, Building Remarkable Brands in a Youth-Driven Culture, which was made available April 20th, 2015. And Matt, we're going to move quickly, but our whole goal here today is to help this listener and future reader get a great idea of what your book's all about. So we have a couple different questions that will allow them to do that. And the first one is, what was the inspiration behind writing YouthNation?
I work with a lot of major corporate marketers, and what I've found over and over and over again with big brands is that there seems to be a major disconnect behind, their knowledge of the marketplace as it exists today, and really what's going on in terms of the groundswell of disruption and change that's really being driven by youth. Many of the people who run major corporations are largely disconnected from these massive changes that are going on because they didn't grow up hardwired with the internet in the household like the millennial audience did. So for me, the book is really meant to be a roadmap for marketers and business decision makers to really understand how to navigate the complex changes that are being brought about by this youth-driven economy, so to be ensured that they're not left in the dust.
So there's so many books that are relevant to the entrepreneur that come out every single day. So this next question I feel is maybe one of the most important, and that's asking, what makes your book different from others regarding the same or similar topic?
Sure. I mean, I think that I've had, a very unique experience in spending a lot of times in the boardrooms of major corporate marketers and corporate decision makers, big companies like Procter & Gamble and Coca-Cola and Nike. So understanding their challenges and what they need. But I've also spent a whole lot of time on college campuses and in nightclubs and in concerts and the places where this culture is really being built. So I think the experience I've had in kind of being within both sides and kind of connecting the dots and figuring out what are these trends and then what are the relevant impacts to big marketers really has led to, I think, a really invaluable resource for entrepreneurs, small business owners, and marketers really of all types.
So Matt, how did you write the book to be read? As far as, it might be easier to ask, how would you like the reader to engage with your book? Can they jump in and jump out based on the information they need at that moment? Or did you really write it to be read from front to back?
I think every chapter provides a unique set of value in its own right. So I think that the reader can go in and look at individual chapters and really get an understanding of a key principle or driving tenet of millennial culture. The front half of the book is really about what is the cultural changes that are being driven by millennials in the United States. And the back half of the book really talks about what are the marketing and advertising implications to that. So I think also a reader can also just look at the front part or back part depending upon where they're looking to gain the most insights.
Okay, perfect. So Matt, we're to my favorite part of the entire interview, and I consider this kind of the meat and potatoes. You have an entrepreneur who's wondering if this is their next great book, and this is the part where I'm asking you to take a deep dive into the content. So will you take the next 5 to 8 minutes and really give this future reader a great idea of what your book's all about?
Sure. So, as I said earlier, there's massive change going on right now in the business landscape, and it's really being driven by cultural changes in our population. right now, the big changes are being made not by decisions made in the boardrooms, but by movements that are happening on the sidewalks, by young, empowered millennials that are leveraging technology and social media to really change the world. And these disruptions are causing changes in all corners of our economy and all corners of the business world. And I've kind of broken them down into different principles. And these principles need to be understood by businesses and understood by marketers in order for them to succeed and make sure that they're not sort of roadkill amidst all this change that's going on. So some of the major changes that I've written about in the book, the first of which I call from status symbol to status update. And that's basically talking about how millennials and the driving kind of consumer right now is much more consumed and obsessed with experiences versus the possession of material items. So retailers and purveyors of goods really need to change the way that they come to market and not so much focus on the unique selling proposition of their products, but of the experiences and stories that can be told from the consumption of their products and services. So really being experience driven. And I talk about a lot of examples in sectors like the supermarket space, to fitness, to nightlife, and who are the companies that are really getting it, and which companies really are still focused on the old model of focusing on their product versus the experiences that their products drive. I talk about changes in music and popular culture and the huge explosion of outdoor festivals driven by popularity in electronic dance music, and how electronic dance music is a massive trend that's not going away anytime soon, and how brands can jump on it. I talk about, since the shift is moving away from the consumption of physical items to the consumption of experiences, young consumers are now focusing on the access of goods versus the ownership of goods. So it's the rental or sharing economy. And what does that mean? And what companies have really thrived by creating marketplaces for the items instead of just traditional retail models. So a company like Rent the Runway, which rents out dresses to young women for the night versus selling them, and how that's impacting every corner. The biggest of which examples, which I go into detail in the book, are examples like Uber and Airbnb, which are massive. I talk about macroeconomic changes that are being driven by millennials, such as them not wanting to move to the suburbs and instead staying in major cities, and then preferring connectivity and being close to one another versus space and privacy. And what are the implications of them staying in the cities in terms of them being able to transact with one another, and then being able to use tools that make it easier for them to live and stay in cities and create whole different versions and definitions of what their career is. I talk about careers and the evolution of careers and what millennials want from careers, how it's moving away from kind of working the corporate ladder for an entire career to moving towards a free agent movement where millennials are now seeking out gigs and projects instead of jobs, and how they can leverage new tools out there like Odesk to have specialized skill sets and market them to many different people at once instead of just hoping to get a job and stay there. And then what are the implications for marketers and people who are running companies that want to keep millennials in a world where they're leaning into free agency, and how that works. I talk about the power of the crowd and how the crowd is an invaluable resource for companies that want to source best-in-class thinking and wisdom, everything from crowdsourcing advertising concepts to graphic design concepts to even crowdfunding and using the crowd to access capital to get new projects in motion. And then lastly, I talk about what all these changes mean to the future of marketing and advertising, starting with television, and how the television model, with the adoption of all these new technologies, is starting to become broken, and how companies that have relied on the age-old television model really need to reinvent themselves in the age where a lot of video content is moving towards digital. I talk about some of the new ways, since we can't rely on TV as much anymore to reach consumers, such as the creation of content and the value of storytelling, and how to actually architect content to be shareable and go viral. And I talk about case studies like the famous Oreo cookie tweet and Gangnam Style, which is the most viewed YouTube video ever, and actually why that happened. I talk about how brands can use data, the social and interest graph, and social media data to be able to accurately target consumers. And lastly, I talk about the importance of people needing to be brands and building their own brands, and brands needing to be people and personifying their brands, and how in this day and age where the news feed combines content from both brands and consumers and media organizations alike into one news feed on your phone, how it's all kind of coming together. And what are the tips for companies to be able to really tell stories in this modern era? So it's really a holistic view of all these changes that are going on. And what I found in talking at conferences all over the country is that, again, there's such a disconnect. Things that are sort of household names and household habits of millennials who are changing the world are still so out of reach and largely misunderstood by business decision makers. And I'm hoping this book really provides a great resource to tie it all together.
Matt, you just did a fantastic job of taking us through your book. And this is so interesting to me. I always look up, what's the top? Is the top of the millennial those that were born 83, 84?
That's about right. I mean, basically, it's 18 to 34-year-olds right now.
18 to 34-year-olds. So I'm 31, just turned 31, and
right.
and it resonates so much with me. And I kind of wonder why we are. What makes those shifts in those different generations? Is it because we saw our parents work a ton and not get to experience, not get to go on those vacations very much? Or what, do you know why exactly there's that shift? Because I see it myself. When you talk about experiences, that is my biggest thing is what can I go do new? Surfing, right. Man, that would be fantastic. I'm always looking for that next experience. And my goal is not to be a millionaire and billionaire. It's all about how much money can I make to have the lifestyle and the experiences. So do you have any information on that at all? Is why millennials are the way they are?
I mean, I think, a huge driver of it is consumers that have grown up with the internet in the household have just had a completely different lifestyle, have been exposed to a whole new set of information, and have been blessed with a whole new set of opportunities than people who didn't grow up with the internet in the household. Mm. It's such a massive shift in the way that we live, having access to the internet, that's created a generation that is almost like a different species from the generation prior. And that's what I think the biggest difference is. And it shifted priorities, it shifted spending habits, it shifted lifestyle habits, it shifted our brains. And I think that's the biggest difference.
Yeah, it's incredible. So the generation that's beyond the millennial, what is that, Generation Y or is that?
Millennials are Gen Y. So Generation beyond is Gen Z.
Gen Z. So have you done any research to see already what the shifts are in that generation?
Well, like any other generational shift, what you start to see with the beginning of a new generation as they start to get consumer power of their own is that the activities that are kind of on the fringe of Gen Y are now being adopted as mainstream in Gen Z. So if the top most heavy users of smartphones are checking their phones 80 times a day in Gen Y, that's kind of now baseline for Gen Z. So it's just the rate of change is accelerating. The media consumption habits are accelerating. If only 50% of Gen Y wants to be cord cutters, then it's probably 75 for Gen Z because this adoption is that much further. The internet and the technology and the speed of data was that much faster for Gen Z, which means that all these trends are going to be accelerated even further moving forward.
Wow, that's incredible. What a relevant topic. I love talking about stuff like this, but we'll move on to the next question. So again, you went through a ton of great information when you were breaking down your book for us. So if the reader can only take away one concept or principle, action item, one takeaway from your entire book and your everything you went with us through so far, what would you want that to be?
I would want it to be that anybody who wants to succeed in business right now really needs to fully understand and embrace youth culture to do so. They need to understand that young people are changing the world and that decisions and their lifestyle habits are the ones that are disrupting every industry. And in order for them to succeed, they need to understand what's going on with young people. They can't just ignore it anymore because young people have become far too powerful in dictating our future.
That's powerful. I'm actually writing that down. And Matt, you said a couple of different quote-worthy things so far. Do you have a favorite quote from your book, something that you wrote that you think will resonate with the audience? And we take a minute to explain what that quote means to you.
Yeah, well, there's a couple that I came up with, one of which is I came up with this quote with an acronym called DIFTI, DIFTI, which stands for Did It for the Instagram. And what I've uncovered in my research is that millennials are now seeking out experiences Not so much because they actually want to have those experiences, but more that so they can actually capture those experiences and share them with their friends, because experiences have become the new social currency. So experiences have become so important in defining young people in terms of who they are that they're now seeking out experiences solely for the ability to share them.
Experience is the new currency.
That's right.
That's incredible. Well, very good. Well, for those that want to do, I'm sitting here. It's hard for me to ask about quotes because I want to think more deeply on them. I mean, that's what quotes are for. So we're going to put that in the show notes at the elpodcast.com. So those that are like 75, 80% of our listeners, you can tell they're entrepreneurs. They're mobile right now. They are listening while they are running, walking, driving, doing something. So they can go back and check out that quote and think about that further. But Matt, we're asking you in this next question, we're asking you for the recommendation. So if there was only one book you could recommend based on the way that it changed your life, maybe created a lifestyle shift or a paradigm shift for you, what book would you recommend?
Well, it's funny because I've been thinking about the power of books so much recently, as you know, I've just put one out in the marketplace. I read a book years and years ago by Seth Godin called Permission Marketing. And I thought that book was really ahead of its time because the principle behind the book is that the way that media is changing, soon marketers will not be able to force their way and bombard their way to the consumer, but rather have to earn the way to their attention by providing value. And when Seth Godin wrote this book, it was before the social media age. But I think what he wrote was really profound because fast forward to today, and that's exactly right. Brands need to earn their way to get consumers' attention. Traditional, bombarding-based advertising doesn't work anymore, and it's now about providing value and providing context and content to the consumer. And you can only do that by earning their permission. So that was definitely a book that made me rethink what marketing and advertising meant at a very kind of early and pivotal stage in my career.
And what was the title one more time?
Permission Marketing.
Permission Marketing. Fantastic. Well, Matt, before we depart, can you recommend the best way for our listeners to not only get more information on you, but also get more information on your book, YouthNation?
Yeah, so to learn more about the book, you can go to youthnation.net, youth.nation.net. And the best way to reach me is on Twitter, at MattyB, MattyB.
Excellent. Well, Matt, fascinating information. Thank you for sharing, and thank you for coming on and sharing your book with us.
Happy to be here. Thanks so much for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Thanks again for listening in today. If you'd like more information on Matt or his book, YouthNation, check out the show notes at the elpodcast.com. And at that same website, you can also become a VIP. And that'll get you access or the opportunity to win this book. So that's, again, the elpodcast.com.
Looking for your next book idea? Head over to the elpodcast.com, where Wade shares his amazing resource, the top 10 business books recommended by over 500 entrepreneurs, with you for free. That's the elpodcast.com. Till the next time, keep it on the EL.